Hello and welcome to the Ground Jewels. My name is James Dixon and I'm so pleased that you've joined us this week. I'm also really pleased at the feedback we got for last week's episode, which we did with Gary Barwell when we were looking at Edgbaston Cricket Ground. Truly blown away with the number of nice comments about that, and yeah, Gary was a delight to interview. And we have another fantastic episode for you this week. Very different from cricket. We're not even staying in the same country. Not even staying in the same continent. We're going to go to North America again. And this time we're discussing college football, and specifically Beaver Stadium, the home of the Penn State Nittany Lions. You may never have heard of Beaver Stadium before, and it has 106,000 seats in it. A giant, vast stadium that I've had the privilege to go to. In fact, I've had the privilege to go to it with our guest today, Chris Law, the sports producer from America. He's been involved with ESPN and NFL Network and others. And Chris is from State College, Pennsylvania, and a hometown fan of Penn State, one of the most storied colleges in all of college football in America. So his story is great. His interview is great. That's coming up shortly. But first, we always do a little bit of news from around the grounds. And this week, Old Trafford is in the spotlight because Jim Ratcliffe, the Ineos owner and now Man United minority owner, something like that, he's announced plans to build a new Old Trafford, which is desperately needed because Old Trafford is run down. I last went for the Rugby League World Cup final in the autumn. The roof was leaking. The concessions are awful. There's no leg room. There's no electronic scoreboards to speak of. And you can see why, whenever there's a major event like Euro 2028, people are opting to go to the smaller Etihad Stadium because of the better facilities than the larger Old Trafford. So rebuilding Old Trafford is on the table. They're talking about doing it literally adjacent to the current Old Trafford, which is great because I couldn't imagine Manchester United moving out of that part of Salford. Hopefully it happens because Manchester United are one of the great clubs of English football and they deserve a stadium befitting of their history and their heritage, which currently they do not have. The other big bit of ground news from football this week is the World Cup. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I told you that the World Cup final for 2026 was going to be in Dallas. I was wrong. It was being reported as it being in Dallas. It was reported as a done deal. But this week, FIFA have come out and said it's going to be New York, or more accurately, New Jersey, the MetLife Stadium in New Jersey. I'm a bit conflicted on this. It's not as good a stadium as AT&T Stadium, or known as Jerry World, that is there in Dallas. But it is easier to get to from a public transport point of view. Is that what FIFA have gone with? Are they thinking about the fan experience? I mean, it'd be unusual for them, but if they are, congratulations. I kind of suspect they want the brand name of the World Cup final being in New York, and it's not. It's in New Jersey. But MetLife Stadium, 82,000-seater stadium, home of the New York Giants and the New York Jets in NFL. That's going to host the 2026 World Cup final. But this week we're talking about a much bigger stadium, and a stadium only a few hours away from MetLife, Beaver Stadium, State College, Pennsylvania.
So today on the Ground Jewels, I'm delighted to be joined by my friend. It's nice to have a friend join the show. My friend Chris Law. He is a Penn State superfan, formerly of the National Football League, of DirecTV, a sports producer over in the States, and as I said, for this purposes, a massive Penn State fan. Chris, welcome to the Ground Jewels.
We are, James.
We are friends. We're still friends.
And we are Penn State. That's the saying, my man.
But I am so out of practice.
That's okay.
We are Penn State. Yes. That is, yes. Oh, mate, that brought back memories.
Oh, yeah.
So I do apologize. I thought you were just affirming our friendship.
I was doing both.
You were doing both. That's good. So let's start with Penn State. We're talking about Beaver Stadium, which is a college athletic stadium, and it may surprise listeners in the UK to know that your college stadium, and this isn't the only college stadium of this sort of size, holds 106,000 spectators.
Yeah, it's quite remarkable. It's known as the second largest stadium in college sports in the United States, behind that one up north in Michigan, which I keep the M out of that name. But it says 106 and change. Yet every game they announce the attendance as 110 plus thousand, which I don't really know where those 4,000 extra necessarily come from. But standing room only, the sidelines, all of that. But yeah, it's an eclectic atmosphere for sure. Very electric.
I mean, the game I went to, the attendance was 109,000, so you squeezed an extra 3,000 in that day.
So what game? I meant to ask you because I know you came, and you let me know this back in the time. This is back in my days with the NFL still, and we were doing the podcast, which I was so grateful for the international audience that we got to have for that, because it introduced me to folks like yourself and Will Gavin and some other guys that were avid listeners of the show and the podcast. And, one of my big regrets is Penn State had scheduled a game at Croke Park in Ireland.
Yes.
And I was so excited. I got tickets. I was supposed to go. And then, work stuff got in the way with the change from the NFL to DirecTV and all of that. I had to end up canceling my tickets and selling them. But, I want to hear more, and obviously you get into it whenever you want to, but I'm interested in your experience at Beaver Stadium and what game that was.
So I went to and just as a little aside, I think that was one of my favourite tweets of yours of all time, when you said you were coming to Croke Park and you said, "UK, here we come," which you got a little bit of stick about from some Irish fans, I remember.
I know. My geography is one of my strong suits. In that case, not so much.
Geography was fine. The politics of, say, the UK were difficult, but broadly, geographically, you were very, very close. I came to the 2013 game against Michigan, which was a whiteout, and it was a primetime game. And it went to 4 overtimes. And so it was like one of the great games in Beaver Stadium's history. And I remember Alan Robinson, who obviously went on to have a career with the Jags and the Bears and the Rams, and I think he's with the Steelers now, catching a great catch in one of the overtimes down near the student section to kind of keep the game going. It was just... I've often said to people that is the best atmosphere I've ever been in at a sporting event.
Awesome.
And when anyone in the UK, and a couple of weeks ago we were chatting to Charles Dagnall, who's a cricket broadcaster in the UK, and he was talking about his love of the NFL, and he said he'd never been to a college game, and I said, you've got to go to, because it's so different to what we have here. And I remember that game so fondly. I do feel like, I mean, there's so much kindness that you showed me, because I think I got in touch with you and said we're doing this big trip. We were going from West Coast to East Coast, and it's like, can you recommend that? And you were like, well, I'm going to be at that game. Come and join us for the tailgate. And I was like, okay. And then when we turned up, you put, like, I don't know if it was your family or friends, but you get, there were 6 of us. We've been on the road for about a week at this time. We weren't eating great. We were going from like hostel to hostel. And you put like this homemade, like, foot-long sandwich in each of our hands. And we were just like, we made about 10 spare just in, for people who turned up. And it was just like, okay. I mean, British people were sort of uncomfortable by that level of sort of hospitality. We'd never think to make sort of 10 spare meals just in case anyone showed up to the sports game that we were going to. But no, that was fantastic. However, I do have a bone to pick with you. You didn't tell me about the whiteout. And none of us knew. And so there's 109,000 people, mostly dressed all in white. There's a very tiny student section from Michigan who aren't dressed in white.
Sure.
And then there's me and my 5 mates who are in red and green and whatever kind of football shirt we had on that day. And we did feel like people knew that we weren't local. And that is the only thing I will say. Because it's one of those sort of strange, almost like cult-like things where 100,000 people have all agreed to come to essentially a big field.
Yes.
All agreed to wear the same and chant this one chant, which only has 4 words: "We are Penn State," and we could pick up the chant. That's fine.
You got that part.
We got that part right, but we couldn't easily disguise ourselves, and it was very obvious we were out of towners.
Yeah, well, see, that was intentional, James. I had to try and prop up the local state college economy. I figured you guys would buy some shirts. When here, I think the euro or the pound, whatever you guys were in at that time, was stronger than the dollar. We needed some of that tourist money to come into good old Happy Valley. But no, yeah, that was definitely an error on my part. The whiteout is a unique experience. It started Guido Diella, who worked for the university and was in charge of like their marketing and stuff, started the idea back in the mid 2000s. And, this is pre-Twitter, pre-social media, really. Well, Facebook was just getting started whenever this came out. So to get the idea out to, at the time they allocate about 20 to 24,000 of the tickets are allocated to students. So just to get that word to spread on campus is kind of how it started, and then it erupted into the entire fan base. And like coaches like Urban Meyer, college football champion, other coaches in the Big Ten have said the whiteout is an experience like none other. It's essentially, most home field advantages in American football. The odds makers put it at about 3 points as a home field advantage. Urban Meyer said the whiteout's worth a 10-point advantage for Penn State. It really is that type of atmosphere, and something that I'm so happy that you got to experience. And I believe every college football fan should be able to experience at one time if you're a true college football fan.
It is incredibly unique, and particularly when the sort of sun sets in like say in Happy Valley and the lights start to take over. It is a special thing, and it helps. I think that the team it feels like such a throwback. So I'm quite surprised that you tell me that it only started in the sort of 2000s, because the whole sort of Penn State experience is a bit of a throwback, isn't it? You've got it's white pants, it's a white shirt, it's a white helmet with one stripe on.
Yep.
You're not doing what, say, Nike do with the Oregon Ducks, or where you've got different uniforms for each game that are wildly, inventive and creative. It's very much a program that plays on its traditions, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, the saying is, black cleats, no names on the backs of the jerseys, all of that, because it's about the team. It always was that. And, it is weird. It is such a unique experience, but it's also, look at how simple it is. It's a white shirt. And the idea behind it, I think, is what does everybody have? That they don't have to necessarily go out and buy. Everybody has a white shirt. There's no excuse. And for Penn State games for a long time, the student section always brought it. Like, it was a great, that when you're in that it's the southeast kind of corner of the end zone. It is loud. It's the old timers on the west side of the end zone that have had season tickets for 30 years. Now my age, so I can't call them old timers, 40 in their 40s, 50s, 60s, 70s, that sometimes can be a little late to the party, if you will. So it really got the entire crowd involved, which if you're going to seat 100,000+ people and 60,000 of them aren't as engaged, what's the advantage there? But you get that 110,000 people all chanting and romping and going nuts at the same time. Man, it's something to behold. I'd like them to do what they do up in Seattle one time, where they test like the earthquake metric of the seismic waves to see what we're going up against, because it's got to be pretty good.
I guess we understand, Seattle's on the ring of fire, isn't it? Or the whole Pacific coast is on the ring of fire. So that it makes sense to install those earthquake monitors there. I'm not sure it's needed in Pennsylvania, but
no.
I think you'd be right up there. And one of the and you kind of touched on it there. I think one of the interesting things for British fans as well is this, some of them will know that college football stadiums are huge in America, and it's a huge sport, but they won't necessarily appreciate the intergenerational nature of supporters. You might think, oh, it's just college students, but
Sure.
it's really not. And you're sort of a Penn State lifer. You told me you grew up or born a couple of miles from the stadium. You went to, you're from near State College. You went to Penn State. You're back in the area. You know, is that an unusual sort of story, or do most people? Because in the UK, it tends to be people move away from their home to go
Sure.
to go to university.
Yeah, so I grew up in State College. My high school that I went to is called State College Area High School, and Penn State is in State College. So grew up there, and I had a parent who worked at the university. So I got 75% off tuition. So I was basically, I tell people I was a scholarship fan, essentially. So I didn't have much of a choice when it came to that, but I also didn't really want to go anywhere else. And then as far as getting into Penn State it's a good school. It's not Harvard by any means, but academic wise, it's a good school, a very good Big Ten school. And if you're from State College or if you're from Pennsylvania and you want to go to Penn State, typically they start freshmen and sophomores out at their branch campuses because we have, I believe it's over 25 to 30 branch campuses throughout the state. But for me, growing up in State College, my branch campus is University Park. So a lot of freshmen do come from other areas into Penn State, it's harder to get in unless your branch campus is Penn State. So I don't need to get into SAT scores here and all of that. But yeah, so there wasn't much of a choice for me. I knew where I was going. As I mentioned to you in our exchange to set this up, I was born at Center Community Hospital. And from your time there, when you went, you could see the way Penn State is set up for the tailgating experience. It's agricultural land. I mean, Penn State was founded in 1855 as an agricultural school. And when it's not a game day, those fields, there's some cow pies all around in some of those areas. And Center Community Hospital is within view of the stadium where I was born. So for me, there was really no choice as to where I wanted to go, where I was going to go. And that's the way it is for a lot of people growing up in State College. A lot of people do get out and venture out other places as well. But yeah, I never really had a doubt as to where I was headed.
And so do you remember the sort of first time that you were taken there, or you made your own way? I know you say you don't quite remember the first game and who it was against, but do you remember your first experience of going, or before you were a student?
Yeah, when that kind of triggered a disappointment in myself when you had kind of mentioned that you were asking me that. Like, I was trying to think back because I have a pretty good recall, and I was like, I don't specifically remember because I was fortunate. Like, we didn't have season tickets as a family, but I had a lot of friends who did. So I would always get the leftover ticket and get to go to games with family friends growing up. And then I eventually covered the team as well in college, and then worked for ESPN and ABC Sports in production. So I was working. So I got to go to games all throughout college and stuff. Both from the stands, from the student section, from the field, from the press box to kind of every angle. So that specific memory of my first time walking into Beaver Stadium, I'd love to lie to you and tell you this. Oh, I remember the day. It was a crisp fall day, October 15th or whatever. But I don't recall it. I just remember I remember being in the stadium as a youngster and just seeing that many people. And then my first tangible memories of Penn State football were probably that 1994 season. I was 11 years old. I mean, I remember some stuff before that, but that's when Penn State went undefeated that year. We were 12-0. Kind of got robbed on the national title front. AP poll awarded it to Nebraska, Tommy Frazier, and the Hoosiers, or the Huskers. So that was really when I became diehard, knowing players by name at 10, 11 years old. And then the 1999 season took it another level. That was when LeVar Arrington and Courtney Brown were on the team. They went 1-2 overall in the NFL draft. And my one friend and I, who I went to a lot of games with, his name's Josh Zetner. His parents had season tickets, and we would watch LeVar as a freshman on special teams because there was just something about him. He would run down the field like a maniac, and he was hitting somebody on every play. And he was a highly touted player, but he didn't. That was still when Joe Paterno was the coach, and freshmen didn't really play very much. They didn't get many opportunities on the field with the either starting offense or defense. And we knew he was going to be something special. And sure enough, 2-time All-American, and top 2 NFL draft pick. And those are really when the ball really started rolling for us, or for me as a diehard.
It's quite a formative time, that sort of that teenage time.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of British listeners will be confused that you were an undefeated team.
Mm-hmm.
And you didn't win the championship that season. So I mean, I know there's a whole history in terms of how the evolution of college football has happened, but we're talking really relatively recently, where in America, this land that we just think of as, they've put a playoff on the end of everything.
Sure.
That's what we think about. We think of ourselves as our sports structure as we're structured by leagues and promotion and relegation, and America is the franchise system and playoffs to decide the winners. And you had a bunch of journalists voting to decide who was the best team.
Yeah, it's quite absurd in certain aspects when you really do think about it. And this is I tweeted something out. I don't even know how we say that anymore. Do we still say tweeted, or do we say X'd something out? I don't know.
It's dying. Don't worry.
Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Elon. But I tweeted something out whenever Florida State just got not voted into the college football playoff as an undefeated team. I said, this is the biggest robbery in college football since the 1994 Penn State team against Nebraska. Because what Penn State fans are really bitter about is 3 years later, in 1997, Nebraska went undefeated and Michigan went undefeated, and they were awarded split co-national championships. That Penn State offense will go down as one of the greatest offenses in college football history. Kajana Carter, you got number 1 overall draft pick. Unfortunately, his NFL career didn't work out. Kerry Collins, Kyle Brady. The offensive line was just disgustingly good. My good buddy Keith Conlon was on that offensive line, as well as a couple other studs. So, and I'm also jealous of, we're trying to replicate some of what you do. We have this NBA in-season tournament now, the NBA Cup, essentially, which is something, that soccer has been doing for years in promotions. And I think where the NBA got it right is it became popular. Where they got it wrong is nobody knew what the hell was going on at the start of the season, how it was going to work. Certain players didn't know that the points you scored in a game mattered for seeding. So certain fans thought other teams were trying to run up scores, but they almost were getting into fights at the end of games, and coaches were exchanging barbs. But we're trying to take a page out of your book. And, a fellow producer who I'm sure I know you're aware of from the Dan Patrick Show, Paul Pabst, tweeted out something the other day about if an NFL team has 10 consecutive losing seasons without making the playoffs, the owner should be forced to sell the team. And I replied to him that I love the idea. I said, what you're going to have happen is the owners will vote for a 2014 playoff. But I said, let's go to the European style. Let's go to relegation in the NFL. Bump down the worst NFL team, bump up Alabama, bump up or go to the XFL, something. But because I love that idea of relegation, where if you don't make it, if you're not putting a winning product together, you don't deserve to be in the top tier leagues. And I've thought, actually, not so much the NFL, but I've thought that college football should go to that model, because right now, competing for a national championship, technically there's over 120 schools, but really there's only 65, whatever, that have a shot out of those big 5 conferences, which, I don't know, we're in shambles over here in college football. With the Big Ten really is now going to have 18 teams. I don't know what's going on. We'll see how it all plays out, but it's crazy.
The Big Ten was traditionally a sort of Midwest conference, wasn't
it?
And now it's coast to coast. It's taken in USC, and it's got Rutgers going into New York, and it's Maryland's on the coast as well. And there's a lot of realignment in college football. And I think one of the things that is I think the in-person product, if I can borrow that American word, like
Sure.
the in-game experience of going to a college football game is fantastic. When it's the marching bands, the cheerlead, the traditions, not things like Enter Sandman at Virginia Tech or Jump Around at Wisconsin. Everyone's got their own little tradition that makes it a wonderful experience. But to be a fan of college football is so frustrating because the different TV networks that are involved, the different conferences that can't get their act together. You've got teams that do not get rewarded for scheduling hard. Why should Florida State schedule the way that they scheduled this year in terms of the game that they played LSU and was it LSU and Florida out of conference?
Yeah.
They get absolutely hosed by
Exactly.
it needs that. And this is weird because the number of times NFL fans sort of rail against the commissioner, and I know, but it almost needs a commissioner for college football to kind of say, stop working on your own sort of selfish interest and what is the best interest of this entire sport, and then you could have that because promotion and relegation would work really well in college football. I think it would. I hadn't even thought about it, but the idea that, and then every game becomes meaningful, and then that bowl season could be about going up and down rather than just going to have a party in Orlando or wherever you go.
Yeah, and one of the big messes that we're seeing, and it's happened, I mean, some of the bowl games in college football have started. They started 2 or 3 days ago. And I'm watching the game last night, and the broadcast team is saying, well, the starting quarterback has entered the transfer portal. This coach has said any players that have entered the transfer portal for his team aren't eligible to play in the bowl game or aren't going to be playing because they want to get the new guys a chance to go and see what they have for next year's product. Well, as the other team, the sideline reporter did the announcement, and she said that coach embraced it a whole different way. He said, we want these guys to go out. It's their choice if they want to play or not. They don't want to risk injury. So you have the bowl system, which now is kind of irrelevant if you're not in a New Year's Six bowl or better, really, which is sad because the bowls used to be, that was a goal. That was something to get to. Obviously, they're expanding the college football playoff, which has to happen. But, I heard what they did this year by taking Florida State out as an undefeated Power 5 conference was like it's like figure skating. The Russian judge gave an awkward score because their starting quarterback was injured. You're basically saying the underdog can't win, which isn't that what sports is all about? Like how did the Giants beat the Patriots, an 18-0 team, and stop them in the Super Bowl? Or we don't have the movie Rudy without an underdog. Like an underdog story, that whole Jason Kelsey speech after the Eagles won the Super Bowl was an underdog speech. That's what people love and embrace. And on top of that, Florida State had a top 5 defense. And, we're in such a offensive centric world where we care about that so much that good defense is just nobody cares about. It's not rewarded. It's not sexy. It doesn't drive gambling. And that's just, we've opened Pandora's box with that. And just one more thing on this, because I'm so passionate about it. Chip Kelly recently said something. He's the head coach of UCLA, the Bruins. And I've said this a lot, like UCLA and USC joining the Big Ten, great from 2 awesome football teams, like good powerhouse traditional football teams who we look forward to playing in the Rose Bowl. I've been to 2 Rose Bowls against USC. And it works for football. But how does that work for women's field hockey? How does that work for men's soccer? How does that work for the other teams who play 30 plus games a year and have to travel? For me to get to you in Europe, it's a 6-hour flight. For me to get to LA to go to USC, it's a 6-hour flight. How are you going to have these teams that aren't revenue positive do this and succeed both on the field and in the classroom? So Chip Kelly had said something. He said, look, Notre Dame is an independent in football. They're independent. They make their own schedule. They make their own rules around football. But for basketball, they're aligned with the ACC. I believe they're still in the ACC. And for other sports, it changes as to which conference they tie themselves to. That's what football should go to, you take the top 65 teams, that becomes one league. And the other sports, You still hold up the rivalries of Oregon versus Oregon State in the Pac-12 for basketball, or Arizona versus Cal, or whatever it may be, because we're losing those traditions. And that is what makes college football so great, is the traditions, those historic matchups, those rivalries, and all of that. But as you can tell, like, I could go on about this forever, and I don't want to take up all the time on it. It's just something that, sometimes we look nearsighted and we ruin the big picture because of the quick dollar or the quick buck and all of that. And like, who are we really helping with this? And if you're a kid now, you have Texas A&M paying Jimbo Fisher $80 million to walk away. Well, what happens to the 5 kids that committed to that coach or the defensive coordinator who's now gone? Yes, great for the players. Now they can enter the transfer portal. But like, if everyone can leave after every year, there are so many stories you see of the kid that didn't get to start his freshman, sophomore year, gutted it out, made it, and that's what made him a great player. You're seeing guys come into the NFL now with, like, things are just handed to them, or I'm going to pick up my ball and walk away if I don't get to start, versus fight for it. I just feel like we're losing some of that. And I'm going to stop there because I'm going to start saying just mean and nasty things. And I don't want to do that on the Ground Jewels podcast, man.
We're not an exclusively positive place, but we do try and look at the positivity from in sport. And I think it really relates to the fan experience, because the way that the conferences have sort of unorganically sort of taken in different teams, you actually take away from the fan experience.
Exactly.
Because you lose some of the traditional rivalries or the space to schedule them. So I know Penn State Pitt used to be a huge game, and you haven't played them for years. Like, the local rivals, Penn State and Pittsburgh, don't play each other because they're in different conferences, and you're not scheduled to play each other for the next 5 years either. And so those games, which might have been really important to you growing up, you don't get to see.
Can I show you something in regards to that? Can I show you something?
Yeah, go for it.
All right, hold on one second.
Chris has abandoned the Zoom that we're on, which is obviously fantastic for audio. This is where you can tell he's a TV producer, not a radio producer. There we go.
Sorry. So a couple of years ago, during I started my own little thing on the side. State won 4, and we were playing Pitt again. And one of the unique designs was you mentioned the Pitt rivalry.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, just a little fun here for a hat, shirt. It was one of our most popular ones.
So Chris has what I believe is called an emoji on Pitt hat.
Yeah, an emoji with it's a defecation emoji on Pitt.
I'm glad it's not the eggplant.
Yes, no, that's true. But I got a cease and desist order from the University of Pitt for that.
Really?
Yeah, apparently they had trademarked the word Pitt, which I'm not really sure how you could do. So the next iteration, I changed the I in Pitt to an exclamation point. And you just work around it.
So you sort of, like Ohio State, you sort of dotted the I, but in reverse.
Exactly. Great analogy. One question I had for you is, and this is what I also love about college football, and as someone who worked for the NFL for multiple years, is the traditions are what we talk about, and one of the big part of those traditions is the stadium. I mean, Beaver Stadium in its current incarnation was built in 1960. It's been renovated. It's had 5 major renovations. You look at NFL stadiums, like every 20 years, it's a new stadium. You guys over in Europe, your soccer stadiums are as old almost as our football. You don't have many like brand new sprawling facilities, do you?
It's not sprawling because we don't have the space, but we've got sort of 2. There's been a wave of stadium building and renovation. Okay. First, it happened. There was a real strong wave in the 1990s. We'd had some really bad stadium disasters, which thankfully, you don't really have a tradition of in America. And by stadium disasters, I mean people who go to football games and don't come home because there's things like crushes or barriers fail, or
Yeah.
policing fails. And so we had there was a disaster in Scotland called the Ibrox disaster. There was a disaster in Belgium called Heysel, which was where two sets of rival fans were trying to get to each other, and a wall crumbled, and so a really decrepit sort of like old concrete wall crumbled under weight and killed a number of Italian fans. And the most famous one is a ground in a town called Sheffield called Hillsborough. So we used to play our FA Cup semi-finals at neutral grounds. And so a team from Liverpool were taking a team from Nottingham Forest, and they were playing in Sheffield. And there was just really bad policing, and a crush occurred in the and that was the time when we still had metal fences up on the inside of stadiums to keep people off the pitches, because they were worried about hooliganism and things like that. And so Liverpool fans who were coming into the ground were trying to get into there for the kickoff, and because the policing was really bad, they were in the Liverpool fans who were in there earlier were getting crushed against these barriers. And so it's horrible, and that happened in 1989. And so we had a big wave of stadium development in the 1990s, and to make things safer, so we took out a lot. So most of our stadiums went to a big all-seater. And it actually brings me back to the time I went to Beaver Stadium, because that was the first time that I felt scared at a stadium. Since because I'd started going in the early 90s, because I was born in 1984, and the stadium experience was quite safe. You had this game against Michigan where the kickers were having to take field goals or extra points to kind of continue the game into the next overtime and next overtime. Yep. And I remember watching the student section end zone, which is, however wide a football field is, 50 or 60 yards. And so the end zone is the stand is as wide as that. And you had maybe 20,000 people in that stand. And they all rushed to the middle. Yeah. To try and put the kicker off and get in their eye line, and like crazy sort of student fans, really passionate. But me and my friends from England were watching and going, they don't know. Like there's been no American state. Like the idea of fans rushing across seats, just wouldn't be allowed to happen. And that's so that's one of those things that slightly scares me about college football. Particularly, not so much NFL in terms of, I don't know that because you haven't had our tradition, and because there probably isn't the same sort of regulation, I just wonder whether there is really good stadium management, or whether it's been sort of lucky that there's not sort of been an incident. And maybe it's because you don't have away fans, and that was one of the driving factors for why we had barriers stopping fans getting onto the pitch, which would have solved the Hillsborough problem, because they were always trying to keep, certainly in the 80s, we're trying to stop rival sets of fans fighting each other at grounds. Because you don't have a great tradition of travelling supporters, although I know you, because you're a hardcore fan, decided to go and be like a one-man hooligan crew going around supporting Penn State when you were younger.
No, that's good insight. And I've been on the field for quite a few Penn State games, and I'm trying to think of a rush the field incident that I was at there, and I don't know that I recall one. So one of the biggest games, I worked ESPN for the whiteout in 2005, and it was against Ohio State. And that was the one where Tamba Ali had the sack on Troy Smith. I don't know if you remember, there's like an iconic photo of Troy Smith completely inverted upside down. The ball's coming loose. Great strip sack. I worked for the week, and then the first half of the game, then I had to go. I bartended at two bars in state. I bartended at two different bars. I wasn't there for the fans rushing the field for that one. I did one Super Bowl where I was on the field for the entire game. And at the end of it, because NFL games are different. Fans don't rush the field. It's not that same thing. But as soon as the confetti hits and it goes, there's so many credentialed media members that media members become the problem. And we had to go in because we were shooting some stuff, and we had to run it back to the trucks. And I got in there, and I literally find myself a foot away from Eli Manning as the one of the Giants officials is handing Eli the ball, and he's like, Eli, 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 and he hands him the game ball, and I'm right there. It was like, it's a surreal moment. But just that, and that was probably only 250 to 400 people. We were moving in 15-foot increments side without moving. Like, you couldn't control it. So it takes 1, 2, 5 people that tumble for everyone to tumble. And that's only 250 to 400 media members. So you can imagine 10,000, 20,000 fans converging. And that being a very, very scary thing. So I can understand that moment. The only time I felt not unsafe, but like a whoa moment in a stadium, and I don't know if you made it there. You mentioned this stadium earlier. It's the only Big Ten stadium I'll give credit to, and their fans credit, was Camp Randall. Because when the fourth quarter comes on and Jump Around hits, the stadium is amazing, and it literally, you don't know that the structural support is there. You get worried, like very worried, and it's a valid point on that.
Well, yeah, I mean, I had the same. I had the same feeling when I was at Beaver Stadium. I was in the non-student end zone on the top deck. I think like the 5th deck or whatever it is, and the whole ground is jumping, and you're like, "Oh dear!" It's just, and then but it's what I'm interested in your take. Because obviously, you've been there a lot, but the facilities wise, it's very basic, right? There's nothing.
Yeah. So in terms of the stadium, yeah, yes, it's nothing like. So they've added during those 5 renovations I mentioned, like they added luxury suites to one side. So
I saw that
it's on the east side of the stadium. There's luxury suites. The press box was always on the west side. And the press box was old. That was the last thing to get one of the last things to get renovated. But really, no, there's nothing like, it's not like SoFi Stadium where the Rams play, obviously, or some of these Jerry's World in Dallas, where it's just a spectacle to look at. It really doesn't look like much. They added a weather vane, which I don't know if it was there when you came. It's a carve out it's a Nittany Lion, I believe, made in bronze. It weighs a few hundred pounds. I don't know how the wind can even spin it. It's justified as a weather vane that probably cost alumni a pretty quid, if you will. Yeah, there's nothing absolutely unique in the design. You can tell that it was built in the 60s, that it started out as a low stadium and just stacked upon. But they have made seats more comfortable. One of the worst, some of the stadiums like Michigan, I think Beaver Stadium is actually larger than Michigan. The unique thing about Michigan is when you walk into the stadium, you're at ground level, and the stadium is down low. So you really only, if you have upper level seats, you walk up. I don't know this for sure because I've been there a few times. I just don't recall. It's like maybe 30, 40 rows, but you have to walk down like 80 rows to get down towards the field. So that's kind of a unique thing about the Big House, but their seating is so tight also. Like I think Beaver Stadium is actually physically a larger stadium, but anytime I can get a dig in on Michigan, I'm happy to. So.
Yeah, and that's completely fine. In terms of, I've not been to the Big House. I've not been to Ohio State.
Well, can I ask what other stadiums in the U.S. have you been? Have you gotten to any?
So I've been to Lambeau. I've been to Soldier Field. I've been to Beaver Stadium. I've been to the Ravens Stadium. I went to MT&T. I went to the old Candlestick Park. I've been to Oakland Coliseum, which is glorious. I'm so disappointed that
you like the Coliseum?
I've been to the Coliseum for football. I've been to the Coliseum for baseball.
Okay.
I've seen baseball playoffs in the Coliseum. It's not great, but it is. It is one of like late night. Getting in Oakland,
sure,
it's one of the scariest places I've been in America.
It's the black hole, man.
I love it. I love all of that sort of stuff. Where else? I'm sure I've been somewhere.
See, I'm jealous of the very first one. I've never been to Lambeau,
Okay.
That's on a bucket list for me because I think it's the closest NFL stadium to resemble a college football stadium probably in the league. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, what Soldier Field doesn't have is the size. I
yeah,
mean, it's got the lovely colonnades and it's got lots of history, but it is the smallest NFL stadium, so it doesn't have that college feel of vastness. Whereas Lambeau is really interesting. But they've done really nice renovations. But you've still got the really basic stuff in there. So you've got some bits that some seats which are just wooden bleachers, which does feel really nice and old school and is
sure.
a world away from, Mercedes-Benz in Atlanta or, whatever, one of these fancy new stadiums. And those are the sort of stadiums that we're getting over here now. Like people are seeing and I think it probably started with Jerry Jones and what they did in Dallas, and the people kind of seeing, oh wow, we can do something amazing, and we've got stadiums like the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, which hosts NFL games every year. There's a stadium in Munich, which actually hosted an NFL game as well, but Bayern Munich's ground in the Alliance Arena in Munich is very futuristic. There are going to be a couple of new stadiums in Milan now. They're getting rid of the old San Siro, which is a great historic football ground, and they're going to put a couple of new stadiums there, one for each of the teams. So we're going through a phase of building in Europe. There's going to be a new one in Liverpool as well called Bramley Docks, where Everton are going away from their like really old 19th century stadium, which has been around for 120 years, done by a famous architect called Archibald Leach, and they're going for like this brand new fancy thing as well. So we're as always, we borrow a little bit from American culture, and seeing what you guys have been doing that has prompted people to kind of go down this big stadium experience sort of route. So we're going to have a mixture soon of American style stadiums and your very traditional sort of four stand British European football grounds.
Yeah, and it's interesting you meant, because I do think that there's a struggle for fans nowadays. Like I know I personally. I love going to games. Don't get me wrong. I've been fortunate and spoiled that I've gotten to be on the sidelines for games, so that experience is amazing. Being in the stands, it kind of becomes more of a party atmosphere, and it's harder to lock in and pay attention to the game. So I almost, and with TV and how good the quality is, and the replay and the information you're getting, and now the prices of tickets for certain things. I almost enjoyed the TV experience better, and I think that's what you're seeing with a lot of stadiums is they're trying to change the model to a more higher level experience. The number of fans necessarily isn't the point, more so as the experience, the comfortableness, the order from your seats, which is crazy to me. I think part of the game is getting up out of your seats, going and getting a hot dog at a baseball game or whatever it is, a beer. But, you mentioned you were in Baltimore at their stadium, and really Baltimore is but for baseball is where the stadium adjustment for Major League Baseball really took place at Camden Yards, where you went from stadiums that were like Three Rivers in Pittsburgh or the Vet in Philadelphia, these $60,000, $70,000 just round things, to the nice architectural design of the throwback stadiums to the 40s and 50s in the U.S. That's what Camden Yards brought to the table when I believe it was in the mid 90s, I think, that Camden Yards came about. And then that's been emulated all over baseball to these kind of throwback style parks, which I think is great. Whereas in football, we have kind of seen a little bit of the opposite, like with, SoFi, with Jerry's World. These are still massive structures, but they're not necessarily built for 80,000 fans. It's still 60,000 because they want that luxurious in-game experience because TV is so good. People don't want to come unless they're getting an actual unique experience out of it. But the price point is just, it's tough. It's an experience to get to games.
We're seeing, I think fans have to exist, but almost at the moment fans exist certainly in, say, an NFL context, because the in-game product would look very, very strange without fans being there. We're almost there to enhance the TV product, not for our own sort of gratification, I would say, and a little bit of that. I mean, it's more than creeping into football. You've got these things called tunnel experiences, which I'm sure we've borrowed from America, where you've got the two-way glass, and you can pay for a pre-match meal, and you get as many drinks as you want, and then you see the players come from the dressing room out onto the pitch through this two-way glass, and you can be right up against them. Manchester City have this, and Tottenham have this as well, and where you can. It's almost like, I don't know. It's like Truman showing the whole sort
it's
of
like watching
fan experience.
I'm not equating the athletes or players to zoo animals, but it's like you're at a zoo watching, like you're up against the glass watching in amazement. Like, Truman experience is probably a way better analogy of.
They're the gladiators. They're modern day gladiators.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just for a long time, stadiums looked like the Colosseum, and now with new technology and digital and all that kind of stuff, they're sort of being reimagined. And it's but they've got to keep. And I really want to get like a stadium architect on the show to kind of talk about it, because I'm sure they'll have some fascinating sort of insight into this. But it's kind of, how do you, if it's just about getting, you surely couldn't have a stadium of all luxury suites. You can't. The atmosphere goes. I truly believe that there's got to be some balance between the fan experience and the traditional fan experience and the atmosphere that's generated. And I just don't. We saw it during the COVID pandemic. I'm not sure if you guys saw it as much, because NFL was kind of fortunate with the timing of COVID that it didn't kind of hit immediately into their season. But we played Premier League games with no fans.
Yeah.
And it was awful. It was all, it was just like they put all the games on for free and they were on different nights. And the idea was that people would have something to watch, but people were just tuning out, because even though the games were the same and they had nothing else to do, because there were no fans in the stadium, no one was in the stands, it just looked weird and it didn't feel right.
We just had it happen this week. I don't know if you saw it, but the Panthers are awful, the Carolina Panthers, and their stadium was pretty much empty. I mean, the weather was awful. Their team has 2 wins. David Tepper is burning through coaches like no one's ever done, I think, in the history of the NFL. And that stadium just had nothing. Every camera cutaway, like they were trying to not show the stands, but a bunch of stuff leaked, and it's crazy. And now when you watch, because I'm glad they don't do this in soccer and football for you guys, but like the NBA, when I watch a game in the NBA and I see the center court tickets are sold and the first 15 seats are fans and the players are so far down the bench out of it, it's like, what are we doing here? Like that's awesome. But at some point in time, like, it's almost like that's crossing a line, I think, where, I don't know, do you find that awkward in the NBA's product where fans are their seats, or you're sitting literally right next to maybe Steph Curry on the bench? Like, awesome for you, and if you can spend $7,000 for one night of your life to do that. But I just think from a competition standpoint, could you imagine an NFL coach coming over to the sidelines to talk play or strategy and having a high-paying fan 2 feet away from him and his players' interaction? They would go nuts.
I mean, that would make it like college football.
Well, I mean, still, though, at least college football fans are back off. I don't know. I think it's finding that fine balance in line.
From the basketball point of thing, I think, does it add to everyone else's experience? Watching Jack Nicholson on the court side is fun for everybody. Watching Spike Lee, it's fun for everybody. Watching some tech bro from, who makes loads of money at Meta, getting in the way, not so much. But I just don't.
It's a valid point.
I think it kind of depends who. It's so. But then you are seeing some things in basketball where they're sort of interacting with the players adversely because there's maybe too many people near the court.
Yeah.
There's been some imagine if the NBA lost one of its big stars in the playoffs because they've tripped over a fan that's because they've tried to get another $5,000 from selling a couple of extra courtside seats. Is that really good for the NBA in the long term? I don't think so. I think you need your best players and your best teams in deep into your postseason. So but we don't have it here. I mean, partly because football, you would say the best seats aren't the ones right next to the ground. You don't want to be. You don't want to be. So you don't want to be at that sort of low level. So the best seats tend to be sort of like middle of the stadium. So there's no sort of. So they're not sort of. There's no that kind of. There's not that kind of impetus to be there. But one of the things that we do have, which is kind of analogous, is when Wembley was redeveloped, which was redeveloped in 2006. To pay for it, they had an entire tier called Club Wembley, which is, so you have the bottom bowl, and then the seats in the prime position are all luxury suites essentially. And because football halftime is only 15 minutes and they've paid a lot of money and they've got free booze and food, that whole range they just didn't come back after the second half. It would often take 15 minutes into the second half for those seats to be occupied. Oh, wow, yeah. Clear right in front of the camera, really obvious as well. And it's just kind of, and for a long time, that was a discussion here in terms of like, well, if they're not, and it was sort of an affront because they were the people who were going for the social experience of going to the game, which I think is valid, but they were detracting from everyone who was watching the game because it just took your eye off the pitch and to the stands which are empty, and people would be like, I would love to be at that game, and these people are at that game and they're not even watching the game. And that's the sort of sense of injustice which sort of wound people up a little bit.
It's like, what are we doing here, people? But at the end of the day, what I guess unites all of us is that love for the game and for me, a particular stadium, and there are some other ones I adore as well in both college and professional. But man, I'm still just bitter about that Croke Park experience. And one day it'll be not UK here I come, but it'll be something along those lines. Let me ask you this though, if you don't mind.
You go.
Is there going to be another Penn State football game on the James Dixon radar or thing? Or if you do make it back over stateside, is there another stadium that you are keying in on that you really want to see?
If I make it back down stateside, I mean, I would happily go to another Penn State game. Absolutely. I think it's as a stadium, it's vast. The fans are fantastic. I can't say that enough. If I was to make it back over, would I try and collect a new experience? Probably. And for me, the thing that is calling me really strongly is going to watch football in the South. I would love to watch some Southern college football to get a little bit of hospitality. With that Southern hospitality, I've got my eye on Tennessee.
Neyland Stadium,
yeah, because there's something about that. It's quite evocative with the orange, and I don't know. I like the name, the Volunteers. I know it's military, but it feels quite nice.
Well, something about I don't know if you know that, but Tennessee Stadium, it's right by bodies of water.
Yes,
and people tailgate on their boats and they ride their boats in, which it does. I've never been. It looks like an amazing experience. It's the third largest stadium also in the U.S. as well.
It's kind of similar to the University of Washington, which has that as well, because So I've spent some time up in Seattle and Washington, and they have that kind of sailgating experience, which looks great. But I could happily go to Oklahoma, I could go to Nebraska, I could go to Clemson, I could go to LSU, I could go to any of these places and be happy. But my happy spot, and I think it comes into what you were saying with the sort of the getting away from the digital nature of things, the connection. Sure. And it's about having that real connection with people. And I liked what you said earlier about the baseball stadiums, because I think they're the sort of places that you can go. And because there's 162 games and 80 odd home games, they're not all massively hyped up. You can go, be quite anonymous, sit in the stands, and just, for 3 hours or 2.5 now with a pitch clock, but you can get that feeling of watching a game go by. And I think that's kind of that's nice. And I've done it at AT&T Park in San Francisco. I would love to I would love to go to a game at Wrigley.
Oh,
Wrigley's the one for me that's still on the bucket list.
Wrigley's. I got very very fortunate. I've been there a few times, sat in the bleachers. I had a friend that I went to high school with that ended up working in for Major League Baseball teams, and she worked for the Cubs. And she got me 2 tickets to the World Series. I got to go sit in the bleachers for the World Series, and it was just an incredible experience. I can't recommend it enough. And then if you do, I would try and get to 2 games. One where you're either in the bleachers or in the stands, and then another game for rooftop bars. So they have the rooftop
Wow. Yes,
bars
they do.
all around it, which is awesome. There and I used to be a season ticket holder at Petco Park in San Diego. Love Petco Park. It's a very very unique experience. And I'm going to throw one wild card out for you on football stadiums since you want to go to the South. I have not been there, but I've heard fantastic things. The Grove in Ole Miss.
Yes.
In between the hedges. They say that with Georgia, but it's also at Ole Miss. And I've just heard very, very, you want that Southern hospitality vibe and just beautiful place. I've heard unbelievable things. Penn State actually plays Ole Miss in their bowl game. So thankfully it's not in Ole Miss, it's in Georgia. But I would suggest Ole Miss.
I think yeah, they all sound fantastic, and I think the thing is you can't go wrong. You know, if you're looking for that sort of experience, you know, these places have got these big stadiums and they fill them week in, week out because they're doing something right. And I feel like as long as you go with an open mind and, you know, if you're willing to shake off that sort of Britishness about you and be happy to kind of talk to people and just jump into an experience, I think you will have a great time. I certainly did. And, you know, you opened my eyes to college football. It was just a very kind invitation that you extended to me, and I can't thank you enough for it. We're talking about it 10 years later, and yeah, hope to catch up soon.
Yeah, absolutely, James. It's been an honor. I appreciate you having me on. It's an awesome thing you're doing here too, because I mean, what does make the game is the stadium, the ground jewel of it, and great concept, great idea for a show, and I'm ecstatic to be a part of it.
Well, that was Chris. I love that chat. He's great. I love him. I haven't seen him for a while. I think I'm gonna try and get over to the States. I mean, not the only reason. Sorry, but he's yeah. That was a really really fun chat. So that is us for this week. Next week I'm coming to you, and hopefully it'll be rugby league. That'll be fun. First time I'm doing rugby league. All right, take care.